Hey everybody, welcome back to another 21st Century Renaissance and another open interest newsletter breakdown on GameStop. I'm your host, Dr. Mike LoPiano, and today we are going to be continuing to look at what we can expect from the unfolding of the more bullish of the two scenarios that we talked about in yesterday's breakdown and newsletter. That's coming up today, and what we can expect certainly going into the end of this week, and some things to keep on the radar, I think, ahead of the ex-dividend date for the GameStop warrant special dividend on October 3rd. So that's coming up, as well as some reflections on this old star swap theory that our good friend Richard Newton explored in great detail throughout the history of his channel. So that's coming up today. Before we get to our GameStop discussion, we will go ahead and spend some time continuing on with our reading from the book of Genesis. That is the book of becoming from the Bible. We're continuing on with our account of the fall of man, as it is often known, and the original sin. This is what we looked at yesterday. That is this moment where mankind decides to attempt to take the place of God, right? There is a claim here in this story that the origin of man's ills, of all man's ills, is from this particular moral and value-based root wherein mankind seeks alone through the power of our intellect to take the place of God, that this is the fundamental root of all evil, and to a great extent of, as we'll see, of suffering for all mankind. So we're continuing on with this as we think about the moment in the story as God discovers this and how mankind attempts to, let's say, defend or justify itself before God for having espoused this fantasy. So let's take a look. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden. And I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldst not eat? And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. So we have this episode here, right? So this is the first interaction that mankind has with God, wherein the eyes of mankind have been opened, right? That is, mankind in a certain sense is awakened. Mankind has the sight, that is, the knowledge of good and evil. That is, there is a form of consciousness that mankind did not have prior to this episode, which now mankind is stuck with. And the first fruits, let's say, of this gift from the serpent, from the dragon, as it were, right? Of course, in the Greek translation, this is Draco, where we get our word dragon. Hebrew is Hashanach, I think. Hashanach? Hanachat. Oh, I forget, actually, the Hebrew word for it. But, right, the first thing that mankind tries to do is use this new form of consciousness. Well, first off, mankind is extremely self-conscious. We become self-conscious and anxious beings. We have shame, we have anxiety, and we attempt to hide from God, right? To put some sort of barrier between ourselves and God. And at the same time, right, we also develop this ability to try to what would it be? Try to justify ourselves through ideological excuses. So, right, man says, God comes to man and asks Adam, what's going on here? Why are you doing this? And man immediately goes, woman. Actually, not even just woman, but you. Uh, I did something wrong, but it's actually your fault, right? It's your fault, God, that I did something wrong. This is the first thing that humankind does, is to go, I did something wrong, but it's not actually me. It's actually this other person. And it was this other person, actually, as a secondary consequence of God himself. So, this enlightened consciousness, the knowledge of good and evil that mankind receives as this gift of the serpent's beguilement, mankind immediately takes this and says, no, 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 I'm not responsible for what I do. Other people are responsible for what I do, even the wrong things, especially the wrong things. And other people are responsible for what I do as a secondary consequence of the fact that really, whenever I do something wrong, it's really God. So other people and God are who to blame for I, a man, having committed evil. Oh, what does that sound like? I'm sure I can certainly find many episodes where I can find a reflection of myself in that. And so God, of course, right, turns to the woman too. And the woman says, well, what did you expect? There was this monster that you placed here, right? A serpent beguiled me. I was outwitted. Serpent beguiled you. Right. And then that's when we have to think, right? Because, I remember talking about this with a lot of my students at university, and they'd be like, this story is dumb. It doesn't make sense. This is a dumb story, right? Because serpents can't talk or deceive you. It's like, well, okay. That's right. That's kind of one explanation for the story. We could say, like, well, yeah, the people who told the story were dumb. Right. We could do that with everything. We can do that with any story that we don't understand. We don't understand something. We can do the Adam thing here, right? And go, no, I don't understand, not because I have to think about this in a different way, or I have to meet the story on its own terms, but because the person who wrote it was dumb. Just like if I do something wrong, right? It's not that I did something wrong. It's not that I approached a situation behaviorally and value-based wise incorrectly, but because the author of the situation, in this case, God in the story, was wrong for having created it, right? It's a very, very similar parallel. And so we have to ask, right? Okay, symbolically, metaphorically, right? How can a serpent beguile? How can a serpent talk? Animals don't talk, except they do, right? It depends, of course, what you mean by talking or speaking or beguiling. And so it may be more accurate or easier to understand in the context of the story, in the symbolic language of the story, that it is not so much the serpent that beguiles, but what the serpent represents that beguiles. And if you think about what a serpent represents, right, and to this particular device, I think this way of interpreting symbol and metaphor, I think, in particular, you can go check this out, right? Jordan Peterson's Biblical Lectures. He uses this a lot. Sometimes in some of the later stuff, he might overuse this a bit. But it is a very useful device for trying to gain some perspective. If you're kind of caught in an impasse of like, what is going on here? With the logic, right, of mythos, with the logic of symbols, this can be helpful. It can get carried away, but I think it's reasonable to say something like fear, something like worry, right? What do serpents represent? Threat of death, threat of poisoning, something like that. And so we could say that whatever it is, let's say, that archetypally serpents convey is what deceives and leads the woman astray. That it is a source of negative emotion, something like that. Negative affect, if you prefer. Something like the fear of insufficiency is that which drives man to power, to desire power. And in a particular instance, it is perhaps fear that first drives woman, and let's say fear of something external, fear of threats, something like that. And something like maybe man's fear of losing woman, or man's fear of disappointing woman, or man's fear of not being prized by woman, or man's simple laziness or intolerance to deal with woman's fears that leads man perhaps to ignore what he knows to be right, for a lack of desire to want to embody that negative emotion as well, to take that anxiety or that burden onto himself. But unfortunately, going down this path does not bring what is desired. It simply leads mankind into this pattern of attempting to continue to reconfigure the world in a way that continues to place man in the place of the justified. So immediately, even though they go and commit this, even though Adam and Eve have the fruit, they realize they've done something wrong, they are ashamed, etc. In their conversation with God, they still fail to stop wanting to be in the place that God is, to be in the place of the one who knows better than the Creator, to be in the place of the one who can sit in judgment of God, to be in the place of the one who can assign blame to God. That is what comes as another consequence of this original sin, this first act of evil, let's say. And so when I think about this, sort of what this story says is that this is a pattern that all of us will go through, that mankind is destined to go through and repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat. And I'm sure, this makes for an excellent opportunity for us to reflect today, I mean, you look at what tends to occupy a lot of internet conversation, and it is the same thing of attempting to put oneself in the place of the Creator, attempting to, for fear or anxiety, despair, let's say beguilement, seduction, delusion, if we take the Hebrew verb here, beguiled, it's hishianach. The phrase "the serpent hath beguiled me" is hanachash hishianach. That's what it is. It even sounds like something a serpent would say. Hanachash hishianach. That there is something, that those who have been beguiled, deluded, misled, seduced. This root is actually also related to something like to lend money at interest. It's the same root word, interestingly. But that's something to return to later, especially in the New Testament. But those who have been, that we still repeat this pattern today. Each of us is tempted to do this. That this is as a result of this act, There's a claim in the story that is a result of this act, Because we are the descendants of Adam and Eve, as we'll see. That this is our fate in life, to go through this pattern, to commit this original sin again and again and again and again and again, to do this. That this is within our nature. Bleak. Of course, this isn't where the story ends, Part of the gift of Christ is that there is a way out of this. That the sin of Adam does not culminate in this eternal alienation from God, and this eternal inability to cease this need to try to justify ourselves as imperfect beings to the Creator, right? To whatever that divine impulse is beyond time and space. So, some things for us to think about as we continue with our reading going into tomorrow, right? We'll finish the story, The Fall of Man, tomorrow, which continues to be, right? This is some of the fundamental stories of the biblical canon, and they prove as apt as ever for many of the things I'm sure that we are seeing in our world around us today. So let's get over to our GameStop discussion. And before we get started, we will start with our gratitude. Today's title, Inverting the Stars, obviously, right, goes to some of this great work that Richard Newton did over the course of many months, and over the course of many videos regarding this particular swap theory that he had. We'll talk about that in a bit. So first, thanks, of course, go out to Richard Newton for his work in that regard. We send out some thanks today as well to Chan Young Lee, who may or may not be my friend from Kazakhstan in 8th grade. Yeah, thanks, Chan Young Lee, for sponsoring today's video and newsletter breakdown, as well as to our regular supporters, our monthly supporters, Not Medical Advice, Kurt Lusko, Cosmotropic, Dayswag52, and Hey Luckies, aka Faithless Liver. So, so what I did is I recreated a little bit of Richard's old chart here, and something stood out to me, right? So this particular, for those of you who may not be familiar with the star swap theory, it is Richard Newton went ahead and based on this idea of going through different volatility cycles, something that was proposed by a Reddit user Gherkinit in the River Runs Dry DD, that there are certain cycles, right? GameStop is highly cyclical, goes through price cycles, and that during these cycles, right, there are certain forces at play. Certainly in the case of the River Runs Dry DD, there are derivative cycles. There are cycles of volatility that goes through the options market, level 1 derivatives. Richard, as well as many others, have also tried to look at the degree to which level 2 derivatives, so that is institutional swaps, are in play and may also affect some of these price action phenomena that we've been seeing over a regular basis. One of the things that Richard Newton went ahead and did was he looked at our lows. He looked at our conspicuous lows and then tried to measure and determine whether there was some sort of recurring pattern that connected these very conspicuous lows to one another. And he basically found a tripartite cadence, which he marked on his charts with a yellow, pink, and red star. Now, that pattern repeated there usually, I think, 6 months to 6 months, and then alternating 5 months, 6 months, 5 months, 6 months. So we're not actually sure. Richard wasn't actually sure what this representative theory corresponded to as the real mechanical driver of this price action. He theorized it was swaps. But in any case, it proved to be a pretty powerful indicator that we could accept something like local lows tied into these starred dates. Now, what's very interesting is that on these particular dates this time around, the stars did not mark local lows with respect to our particular cycle, but instead marked local highs, big volatility days to the upside. So for example, largely flat here, going into yellow star swap on this green candle here, which turned out to be a period of considerable upward volatility. Then we traded down, flat, until we get to pink star. And then all of a sudden, whoop, we get a bunch of price action. We get some volatility again. Okay, then down into earnings, coming out of earnings. We think, okay, maybe you got to prepare. We're going to trade down maybe into this red star swap. This would correspond to a deep low, but no, big volatility, big volume to the upside as we move over $1. I think $1.27 up to our high that day, maybe more. Very interesting, right? So in this particular cycle, this is the first time in years, right? This is uncommon for this cadence. These dates still come into play. They're still important dates, but now instead of being deep lows, conspicuously deep lows, they end up being local highs. within the course of our particular trend. So these are outlier upward volatility events. This is new. Not exactly sure what's driving this. This could, I think, as I think about this, this could be one of two things. On the one hand, right, this could suggest that these swap holders are now, they've now flipped these and maybe are going long, right? That this is part of accumulation. This is part of something where their derivatives now are positioned long rather than being positioned short. Or it could mean that long institutions are now explicitly aware of this cadence and maybe trying to use a tactical application of volume and volatility to maybe force the hand of institutions who may still be within these legacy short derivatives. Something to consider. I don't have an answer for that right now, but it is very telling, I should say. It is very interesting to see what this may be telling us in the future and going forward. Now, I am still exercising some caution, right, going into the next couple weeks. Based historically on how special dividends work, I would still expect us to have something of a move down following the ex-dividend date and the dividend issuance on October 7th. I think there's going to be some value necessarily that will be taken out of the stock as it moves over into the warrants as an independent instrument. Right now, that's being priced into the stock price itself. I would not be surprised if we had that acted as something of the midpoint of a price up cycle, something like that. Usually we have this kind of stutter in the middle of the price up cycles. Right, that would be about, that'd be about, usually it's about 6 weeks in. That would be, depends on where you want to start the mark here. Maybe it would be just before earnings. So yeah, it might be about halfway, a little before the halfway mark. But in any case, still exercising a little bit of caution. I think there is a bit of upside left. I think we could see 28. If we crack 28, there's a bit of a high, there's a low options concentration in the 28 to 30 area. So if we take a look here, we don't have a lot of OI. I guess the 29 position is decently sized, but not compared to some of these other positions. We do obviously have a pretty large expansion of our OI in general across our proximal strikes. Things are pointing up. It does look like momentum is looking to carry us upward. We keep having new OI. I mean, this pace basically in the options market has to continue for us to keep moving up, where we have more and more long call OI being inserted at slowly and progressively higher strikes. This type of pattern is typically what we want to see, and what we do see during these price up cycles. When we opened up yesterday, right, I said, I think, if we open below 26, maybe we go down, we trade around 25, and then kind of have a slower week into the end. If we go above 26, well, then we're probably going to move and trade in that 26 to 28 area. As a result, right, what did I do on that? I went ahead as soon as I saw that we started to move pretty strongly above that 26 mark, probably around 26.50. I was like, all right, that they're committing to going up. Went ahead and sold a good number of short puts, right? So went short on puts, which is of course a bullish trade, but one which remains structured in my favor in terms of the probabilities there. On one hand, right, that type of trade, either I'm getting assigned shares at a price that I really, really like to prepare for another move to the upside, or I'm just collecting some premium like I would with a covered call, right? Something like that. Okay, so as we take a look, right, we can see this too. Very large volume, even on the Januaries here, January 16. Very large net call premium coming in, right? 38 million in net call premium. Very, very bullish yesterday. Max Payne moving up to 25.50, right? So already looking like we're probably not ending the week below 26 or much below 26 in kind of the worst case. As we look, 27 has now taken over its position as our call wall. If we do move above 27 and move towards 28, 28 would take over that role. So this, but then this area here, like I pointed out, between 28 and 30 would then serve as a little bit of a weaker hedging zone. We could see some volatility there, but 30, I would, that's kind of our upper before the ex-dividend date, I don't see us moving above 30. Certainly holding any position over 30, a weekly finish over 30, I would say is highly unlikely. High confidence trading range is up to about 28. Maybe next week we could see a kiss of 29 something, right? In terms, this whole gap fill thing, to fill the gap from the second convertible bond offering, right? So can point this out, can visualize this a bit, right? If we take a look here, right, we have this gap. We also have this little gap here, but right, so we opened this day, yeah, right around 29. So opening price was 29.02 on the 11th of June. So if we move up, could go up this way, maybe fill the gap to the low at 29.6, wherever you want to put this, right? This gap or however gap filling actually works, in any case, right? So we do look like we're retracing our steps up this way a bit, but to go much beyond this, I personally, I'm not expecting us to go too far beyond that kind of benchmark prior to the dividend, the ex-dividend issuance date. Like I said, kiss of the 29s, I think that's possible, but beyond that, in that time frame, I would not. I do not think that is a highly likely scenario at this point. We'll see how things develop, but in any case, very much looking forward to seeing what the future holds for us. And continuing on as always as lately with our readings. So we'll see you guys for another video tomorrow. Thanks as always for watching and listening. Blessings out there to everyone, and we will see you. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care, everybody.